When people discuss about sustainable development or sustainable development goals, it needs to center traditional knowledge, indigenous people's knowledge, rather than just coming from, let's say, a technical point of view and from a top-down approach.
Welcome back, everybody. Richard Baker, founder of Collective Responsibility, here today with another episode of Sustainable Ambassador Podcast. For me, this podcast is all about the work of the global professionals, be it nonprofit, academic, government leaders, corporate leaders, tackling the challenges they see. In this episode, I'm extremely happy to have Prabindra Shakya, who is the founding director of Community Empowerment and Social Justice Network, and also convener of the Asia Indigenous Peoples Network of Extractive Industries and Energy. So with that, Prabin, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. It's really great to have you.
Thank you, Richard. It's my pleasure to be here.
As a starting point, an introduction to yourself, like a proper introduction to who you are and the work that you're doing.
So I introduced myself as a human rights activist, human rights defender, indigenous rights defender, and so I've been in the indigenous rights movement for almost 2 decades now, and in this whole movement for human rights movement for 1 year short, 2 decades. So it's been a ride. It's been a journey.
And how did you get into it? Like, what was the catalyst? And was it something that you studied and like, okay, this will be my career, or was it like a calling that brought you into it?
Yeah, it's actually I was studying to be an engineer. After my high school, I was trying to be an engineer, but plans fell apart. Financial situations, family responsibilities or personal responsibilities too. I had to make a different call or take a different track. And that was the time when Nepal was just coming out of a decade-long civil Maoist insurgency, civil war. Yeah, so a peace process was starting, and a lot of international NGOs, national NGOs, international NGOs, and starting to put together their work. Trying to put together a movement of calling for post-conflict transitional justice processes. At that time, an opportunity presented me to start working with an international NGO that had just set up office in Nepal. But I would also say, that calling or that point in life was also defined by the lived experiences of discrimination as an indigenous person. That got me in the work of human in the human rights work, because in Nepal, as in other countries around the world, there is language-based discrimination, there is racial discrimination, ethnicity-based discrimination, and particularly for indigenous Newar people, myself, I had lived experiences of language-based discrimination that got me really motivated to aspire a career in human rights activism.
And when you think about, say, indigenous rights and the issues that you work with, I don't think a lot of people understand like the breadth and scope of what that issue is. So can you maybe talk a little about or introduce the issues of indigenous rights that you see or that you're working with?
I think I have to give you a bit of context here, no? So in Nepal, we had a decade-long Maoist insurgency that was rooted in two main reasons. One being extreme poverty, and then the second being, widespread poverty and extreme socioeconomic inequality against indigenous peoples, against Dalits, which are the so-called untouchables according to Hindu high caste hierarchy. So indigenous this discrimination or inequality in terms of socioeconomic inequality is one of the challenges that indigenous peoples faced and continue to face. In terms of political participation, in terms of participation in civil service, in terms of participation in decision making processes that affect them. To analyze it or to look at it more deeper. I think the issue the key challenge for indigenous peoples is the dispossession of their lands and territories, their lands and resources in the name of state building, in the name of national development, or the economic growth, in the name of conservation, in the name of urbanization. I think that has been one of the key challenges for indigenous peoples across Nepal and also in other parts of the world.
And some of those are very new, right? I mean, urbanization as a concept is pretty new. The move towards, say, electronics and mining, that's actually quite new as well. So the work that you're doing, maybe you can introduce that a little bit on how you're trying to balance those, because it sounds like you're dealing with some real old culture, traditional ones, and then you have more like the modern world and mining and dispossession of land and things like that. Like how do you balance the two?
So, although the forms change of how indigenous peoples are dispossessed of their land, no, earlier again it used to be colonization and people, like let's say some external power wanted to take over their land in the name of in the name of religion, in the name of in the name of civilization, no. Now it might be in the name of extractive, in the name of hydropower, no, in the name of infrastructure development. I think the pattern remains the same, that it is seen as more of a colonial or neo-colonial approach, whereby a certain group of people, the indigenous peoples in this context, are seen as less of a right holder and less of a less of a human being, I would say, no, to be able to make decisions for themselves. One key aspect to this, I would add, Richard, is that earlier colonialism or colonization was like, at one point said it was bad. At one point we said fossil fuels are bad, which is still being contested for some reason for some reason. No, even though the whole world is warming up, and we are facing a climate as well as existential crisis because of because of uncontrolled use of fossil fuels and uncontrolled consumption. Now, what we see is, while indigenous peoples are saying, mining of any minerals, impacting the environment, impacting people is bad. It's still now, it's still being debated by saying that, okay, we need energy, we need batteries, we need roads. No, but I think that all of this is what is grounded on is basically not being able to find the balance between what we need and what we can afford, or like what we can maintain, sustain, within the limited resources that we have in this earth.
You mentioned colonialism, neocolonialism, and there's a lot of history here, but the is that how does that show through today? Because for me, I feel like if I'm listening to you and some of these stories, I'm thinking actually it's more a problem of the legal system and maybe domestic challenges. And how much of that is historical, and then how much of it is really like it's just local and you need to make changes locally?
I think for indigenous peoples, colonialism is as existent today, or maybe let's not say colonialism or neo-colonialism is as extent as is existent to the existent today as it was, let's say, in the 1900s. It is existent in the form of laws and policies, as you were saying, because while let's say West European colonizers left many countries, or like in some way, where kind of made to leave from many Asian countries, the power holders of these new modern states continued the same old land laws, continued the same old forest laws, continued the same old laws related to resources, that basically concentrated the power on the decision makers on a state, while alienating, or like even dispossessing the communities that maintain those lands, that sustain those resources, that sustain those waters. No, and I think that is how I would say colonialism or neo-colonialism is still existent for indigenous peoples, particularly when we hear the concepts or like principles such as eminent domain, whereby a land that is not titled to any person belongs to the state automatically, regardless. There might be communities which might have kept those lands or maintained those lands or traditionally used those lands. Forests automatically become state forest, regardless of communities that sustain those forests. No, waters, rivers, automatically become the purview of states to build dams, regardless of coastal communities or fisher communities who traditionally depended on those rivers and kept them running, kept them flowing, kept them clean for their livelihoods, for the broader society too. So I think that's how I would say colonialism or neocolonialism is still existent for us today.
Okay, so talk to me now a little bit about what you're working on. Like you listed out a really long list of challenges and some historical roots. How do you work against that, or how do you fight that, or how do you create awareness so that changes can be made?
Yeah, so as you introduced me, I have two major hats right now. In Nepal, I work with a collective of indigenous human rights defenders and community-led development practitioners, whereby we are supporting communities by so-called development projects or conservation projects and business investments, particularly to pursue international advocacy. Because while while indigenous communities are recognized in Nepal, our rights in line with international human rights standards, particularly the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, UNDRIP as we call it, and the ILO Convention 169 or the Indigenous and Tribal Peoples Convention are still not guaranteed or recognized international laws. No, so the peoples are in national, the communities or groups are recognized as indigenous peoples or indigenous nationalities, but their rights to their lands, to their resources, to self-determination, to their to having consent on decision making of on matters affecting them is still not recognized. And in this context, let's say when there's a development project, so-called development project, like an expressway being built in south of Kathmandu, or a hydropower project being built in west of Nepal, when these projects impact indigenous communities, we help these communities to particularly pursue international advocacy strategies with the United Nations mechanisms, with the investors like the multilateral development banks, like the Asian Development Bank, that is one of the key financiers of these projects in Nepal, or the World Bank, no, because yeah, because okay, often these communities that are impacted by these projects are not aware of these international investment linkages, because there's this lack of information disclosure and awareness about the safeguards that they are entitled to, and grievance mechanisms that they can access, no. But at the same time, as I said, our collective in Nepal is also a collective of community-led development practitioners. So we are promoting indigenous-led energy solutions. We are promoting indigenous-led development solutions like micro hydropower projects or uh, low carbon energy, cooking solutions, no, as per the needs of the communities and as designed and as implemented by the communities. So these are community-led projects, no. At the regional level, with APNI, or the Asia Indigenous Peoples Network on Extractive Industries and Energy, I'm doing the same, but at the in multiple countries. So APNI is a regional network of indigenous defenders across working across 9 countries now in Asia. Those are Bangladesh, Cambodia, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Nepal, Philippines, Pakistan. So yeah, we are doing the same, but in more countries. And working with APNI, it is more challenging. You have to go across language barriers. There's also cultural barriers and technological barriers, because you are not close to the community as I am when I'm working in Nepal.
But speaking of like APNI, like how much of what you see across the region is similar, and how much of it is, I mean, is it all very similar in the way that it's set up and the challenges that are faced, or are there local differences that like also make it really difficult for you to do your work?
So I would say indigenous peoples across the world face the same challenges. It's the displacement from their lands and resources in various contexts. No, again, as I said, in the name of development, in the name of conservation, but particularly with APNI, we focus on extractive and energy projects. So those are mining projects, agribusiness projects, logging, uh, you know, um, Yeah, hydropower, solar projects, and even carbon trading projects as they are coming up now, no? Because all of these we believe are extractivist in nature. They are based on overexploitation of our natural resources on which communities depend. Yeah, and while those challenges are same, or like the challenges of displacement or dispossession of lands and resources are same. I think the other challenge that is same is also that these communities that are impacted often lack political participation or participation in decision making. There are some differences in certain countries, such as, let's say, Philippines, where APNI is headquartered. In the in terms meaning that in Philippines they have a law that protects the rights of indigenous peoples. It's called the Indigenous Peoples Rights Act. It's one of the most progressive acts, that also guarantees the right to free, prior, and informed consent, FPIC as we call it, in line with international human rights standards for indigenous communities to decide on matters affecting them. No, let's say if there's a hydropower project being introduced for that will affect the community, then if that community has land titles or collective land titles, then they are entitled to be consulted so that the project the authorities have to obtain their FPIC before implementing the project. So in some countries there are some legal protections, national legal protections, but in most countries, the commonality among Asian countries is many of these states even deny that they have indigenous peoples, even deny that there are these distinct groups that have those rights. No, I think the other commonality I would definitely add is, while many of these countries are rapidly pursuing economic growth, it is coming at the costs of displacement of indigenous communities or other rural communities. That is also a commonality, because as you see, as you hear, this is the age of Asia. No, I mean, 21st century is going to be the century of the rise of Asia. So yeah, a lot of these countries are aggressively pursuing any projects that they can see, and even with heavy debts. While those financial debts are also a matter of concern, a bigger matter of concern for me is how they are going to, respect, or how they are going to um, protect these vulnerable communities, these marginalized communities in this pursuit for economic growth.
Which countries do you see are moving more progressively towards solving these challenges? And what do you think either compels them to do it or gives them the security to? Is it because the economy is developing, or is it because they're lacking labor or they're lacking farmland, or like they realize like this is actually a long-term problem for them, or like what's driving government officials to be more progressive or more proactive against it?
So I think the key driver for progress in indigenous movement, or sorry, in states recognizing and protecting indigenous rights, is how strong the indigenous movement can be. That's one. The second thing that we are trying in particular is to push these states from the leverage, or with the leverage of investors, or with the leverage of financiers. No, so yeah, we have seen that in certain countries, when it is the financiers, like let's say the Asian Development Bank or World Bank, telling the governments that you need to have these policies, you need to have these land, um, um, land distribution policies, or let's say land um, allocations systems, or yes, yes, then the governments also take some steps. I think the third, I would say, is also third driving factor currently has also been the climate crisis. No, in the climate and biodiversity crisis, as well as the pollution, no, the multi-crisis, poly-crisis that we are facing. Uh, at the global level, at the in the global discourse, it is increasingly recognized that indigenous peoples have the solutions. No, it is well recognized that recognize, protecting the rights to land and resources of indigenous peoples can go a long way to address climate crisis. If you let indigenous people sustain their forests, that they can be the best carbon sink. No, you don't need to, you don't need to go to geoengineering, all these new solutions at all. So yeah, I think the climate crisis has also been an opportunity for indigenous peoples to make their issues heard, and the governments to take some steps towards towards recognizing their rights, or at least recognize including making having their participation in decisions in decision making. But I just want to add a caveat there. In many countries, and that we are also seeing that in the name of climate solutions, increasingly false solutions are being promulgated. Carbon trading, no, commodifying forests, and then handing over their control to private sector or corporate actors, is again, doubly victimizing indigenous communities, right? Similarly, for let's say hydropower projects, when governments are pursuing mega dams, no, it's again inundating indigenous people's lands and resources, because they see this hydropower as a solution, while it might not be the best solution, and it might even be a false solution to our climate crisis.
But okay, let's assume for a second that hydropower is key to solving climate because it's a zero carbon energy, right? On the other side, you have the indigenous problem. How do you how could they fix that? How could they make both work and do it equitably then? Because I feel like this is actually the challenge, right? It's like you have to make progress as a country level. You have to solve these big country level issues, and the country level issue could be a carbon, an energy need. It could also be just elevating education in people's lives, which generally tends to be you urbanize more people, you put them into a common education system or a common healthcare. Like, but these are things that are also kind of antithesis to respecting tradition and indigenous rights. So, what do you view as like the middle ground, or like what are some of the areas that you will think like we could make progress and you'd be happy with?
I think, uh, firstly, on what you said, Richard, no, hydropower being a zero carbon energy source, or energy, um, is still, I think, up for debate, particularly for the for the for the for the for the for the let's say, particularly in the context of mega dams, like large scale dams that might be, let's say, inundating a huge areas, huge swaths of forests, that might be storing a lot of land, that can even become a source of carbon themselves, or methane, or greenhouse emissions themselves, no. And at the same time, that might also affect natural life of a river. The same is also said for cascade dams, no, because I think when we are talking about hydropower dams, these are the models that we are, I would say, that we are seeing that communities are explicitly against: mega dams, cascade dams, that evidently goes against the natural cycle of life, or natural cycle of the natural environment, no. How we can strike a balance on the need of energy, and on protecting environment, as I said, like, some of the as I said earlier, some of the solutions that we are, let's say, piloting, that we are upscaling, are indigenous led energy solutions. I know, what we are doing are like very small, small scale projects. Like, it's only kilowatts, or at most, like, 10 to 15 kilowatt projects that we have done. But what we have seen, particularly among First Nations in Canada, is that, they have used hydropower, they have used renewable energy as a tool to maintain their control over resources, at the same time, provide for energy needs of a country like Canada, no, and even, beyond the indigenous communities. So how to strike a balance is, I would say, first, it comes in two steps. First, you need to recognize that the communities, the indigenous communities, the indigenous peoples, no, are the rights holders to their lands and resources. and they decide how to use those lands and resources. It's not a, it's not a state actor, it's not a private company or a corporation, or or a development financier that decides what kind of projects should be developed just because there is the technical feasibility or technical potential to to do that. No. Secondly, I would say, the to find to strike that balance, what we also need to see is our consumption pattern. No, we need to be consuming more sustainably. Yeah, I think that is key here. That is one thing that I would definitely like to see as an indigenous person, and as someone who learned from my grandmother's grandfathers about how you can use, how you can not waste, no, and how you can be happy with without excessive consumption. No, I think we need to be able to strike a balance on how we consume, and how much we can produce. No, just import unsustainably. No, because you can import, you have that financial capacity, is might be might not be sustainable, not just for the communities, for the people, but are the people, but for the state itself. No, and again, that's where we are seeing these global trade wars, global geopolitical tensions across the world, because I think these systems are not sustainable. No, and finally, I would say, like, on I just want to say one more thing, Richard, because on the issue of health and education needs too, I think these systems, these perspectives of indigenous peoples are not being taught in the common systems, or in the common education systems, or even in the health systems. Our traditional methods of well-being are not being taught. No, and I think that is also where we are missing out, and that is why we are saying, like, when people discuss about sustainable development or sustainable development goals, it needs to center traditional knowledge, indigenous people's knowledge. It needs to center the local realities, no, rather than just coming from, let's say, a technical point of view, and from a top down approach.
Right, right. Now, and I feel like a lot of countries don't realize that until after they've become too westernized or too urbanized or too monocultured, right? Like they turn everything into a shopping mall that has all the same brands, and they start to go, "Hey, wait a second, what happened to our heritage?" And I wonder, like, do you think that we're moving to that? Because, I see this in, in China right now. I've heard this in Indonesia as well. It's like, like they kind of miss their old ways and they miss the uniqueness of their culture because they've adopted so many other things. Like, do you think that could be the actually the ultimate driving force to really start to respect culture and heritage?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think you're perfectly hitting the home run here. Like, again, we need to be aware about the local realities. Yeah, again, local resources. Just because a developed country, or, like, a country in the West can do it, does not mean, like, we can build a super highway. Does not mean that every country in Asia might need an expressway or super highway too, or multi-level super highway too. And again, coming from Kathmandu, which is the capital of Nepal, Kathmandu Valley, which is the capital of Nepal, whereby my community, indigenous Newar people, have become so marginalized because of this aggressive push for urbanization. For Nepal, because Kathmandu being the capital, the state wanted that, right? We are really, we are really trying to show the state that, it's not the way. That is not the way. Kathmandu was much more beautiful, much more developed or prosperous when we had the culture, when we had our olden ways. Now they are talking about, like, metro metro being built under, a metro railway system being built, being planned under Kathmandu. Even with the current population, we have already lost our traditional underground water distribution system, which we call HITI. And that was enough. That was enough for sustaining the water needs of Kathmandu, for generations. Now we have this mega water drinking water project in north of Kathmandu, and even that is not enough, because we are not again, striking the balance between local resources and what can be consumed or what can be maintained. Yeah. And yeah, again, what you said earlier, I think we have to be aware about our local realities, our olden ways, because I think those were developed over generations, no, over a history.
Okay, so I want to bring that back to you as a person then, because you work in Nepal, but then you also work at the regional level. You're a professional who's trying to make change. Do you think that you trying to make change at the regional level is the best path then? I mean, or is it really like there's so much to do locally, I should focus my time locally? How do you view that? And then how much do you take from the region down back to your home? Like, is that the goal of working regionally is to improve what you're doing locally, or are you trying to scale, which I think everyone in our space is trying to do, and that itself is its own problem?
Yeah, so I divide my time, like 25%, which is more, actually more than 25% for my work in my, with my community or with indigenous communities in Nepal, with SEMSOs, no, Community Empowerment and Social Justice Network. I definitely put more time with APNI these days, because again, I think it has been the reality that way, because SEMSOS has not been able to mobilize resources as much as possible. Also because we have been dependent on grants, no, and as you may know, the development assistance, particularly over the last couple of years, has been very challenging, no. So we have, for myself and for my own, let's say, financial needs too, or like financial responsibilities, I have had to uh, put more work into ABNI, because we were able to raise more, let's say, resources with that. However, I would say that the grants is a secondary issue. My primary, reason of trying to put more work regionally is also because I have had that experience of decades of working at the regional level, and I saw the need that, communities from one country, indigenous, while these communities face common challenges, they are using different strategies that might be, useful to be shared among each other, and they should learn from each other. And I think that was the deciding factor for me to pursue, still continue to work more regionally than at the local level, even after I came back to Nepal, like, during COVID, after almost 1.5 decades of working abroad, no, with regional NGOs and with the UN. And I think the other primary factor, like other deciding factor, one thing that I should tell Richard is that, as you may know, again, capital, a global capital, is very intertwined these days. Like, a Chinese company might be getting money from a Norwegian pension fund, or like the Danish pension fund, no. An Indonesian company is selling to, an Indian company, no, and like mine, the nickel that it is producing, or other minerals that it is producing. So while the global production and capital is very closely connected, the communities, the indigenous peoples that are affected because of this system, no, should also come together to challenge the system. I think that is another key aspect of my regional work. When we are investigating the financiers, when we are investigating the investors, the buyers, and trying to hold them accountable, at this while we are but that doesn't mean that we are not doing national advocacy. We are doing national advocacy, but we are also trying to challenge this global intertwined system, no, capital system and production system.
Okay, so you're going to push the global systems, but often a lot of your issues are very local. Does that mean that you can effectively scale things, or does that mean that every action is really unique in a way and requires? Because I always look at like efficiency of kind of process and people and the investment that you've been making, right? Like you put in 20 years on this. Like, can you effectively scale the programs that you want, or do you feel like if you look around the region, the things that you're doing, like okay, 50% is aligned. It's very similar, but the solution is often very different because the laws are different, the economics are different, the stakeholders are like, do you find any scale really, or is it still kind of piece by piece or project by project?
When you say the problems are local, again, yeah, I would agree that, the impacts are local, but again, I would say the 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 causalities, I would say, are not local, no. The what is causing those problems are not equal, are not local, no. As I said earlier, it might be an Indonesian company that is that is displacing indigenous communities in Borneo, no, in Kalimantan. But that Indonesian company might be selling nickel to for Tesla batteries, right? I mean, that's what is displacing the communities. So the impacts might be local. I think the problem is much more is much more beyond community level and beyond national level, and I would even say the problems are global. And I would and when you talk about scaling, I would say the challenges is what bring us together for the need to scale for the need the challenges are what brings us together. The common challenges are what brings us together for us to be that has let's say required us to scale. Uh, Again, last year we did a regional convening of indigenous defenders from all these 8 countries, that we work in, and they were basically sharing strategies among each other. How one community was one defender had supported community to file a complaint with the World Bank, and then the World Bank policy was was not being implemented well for that project in Pakistan. No, similarly, the other defender was saying like, okay, we are filing a complaint against this copper Indonesian copper company because this Indonesian copper company has been certified for sustainably producing copper by this copper certification scheme, while the communities that we are working with have been displaced. So I think they are sharing strategies, saying that okay, we can target the investors, we can target the certification schemes, we can target the buyers, and that is what I think that's the need that has brought us together to scale. No.
So I was going to ask, like, how do you stay motivated given, I mean, you have all these different challenges, all these different regions, all these roadblocks. It sounds like there is some momentum happening, which is great. But, like, what's I mean, the last few years have been pretty tough on advocates. So, where do you get your motivation when these times are difficult? Is it just in the stories and seeing progress, or is it the community that you're working with, or is it just your own North Pole, like, or North Star? Like, where do you get it?
So I'm a Buddhist. I've been trying meditation a bit to keep calm myself down when I hear let's say a new case, a new community being impacted by this new project. That actually kind of sometimes frustrates me or tires me out to even say like, okay, let's see what we can do for this community, or like let's talk more to strategize. But then when we hear from the community members themselves that they are willing to fight against a very powerful state system, against a very powerful corporate actor, I think that is one of the key factors that drives me. But at the same time, I think our movement or our work in the past few years, we have been able to at least make small gains. Maybe we haven't been able to make drastic changes, no, but we have been able to make small gains. No, we have been able to push financiers like Asian Development Bank, World Bank to adopt stronger policies. We have been able to have this international human rights framework whereby at least there is the minimum standards that we call our states to pursue for. And I think in some of the campaigns that we are working with, we have been able to even cause like we have been able to even get some actual remedy for the communities. I would give you an example. No, like in for this community that we are working with in Western Nepal, they had been fighting for, or they had been struggling for land-based compensation for decades, no, for almost a decade before they filed a complaint with Asian Development Bank that had co-financed the project with European Investment Bank and Japan International Cooperation Agency. It wasn't until they filed this complaint and a dispute resolution process was uh, was uh, was implemented, that the project implementer, which is a government-owned company, state-owned company in Nepal, which had earlier said, we can never increase your compensation, let alone explore a land-based resettlement for you. No, that was the earlier stance. After persistent push from the communities, from defenders, and during this dispute resolution process facilitated by the financiers, now the developer is saying, okay, we need to meet these policies of these financiers, so we will we will explore alternative lands for you. So I think these kind of small gains, I think motivates, uh, you know keeps me going kind of.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of professionals in the space, and I have to like if you look back 20 years, you can see that a lot of progress was made, but you may not feel it right now in the moment, right? Like you just see like the wall in front of you, but we've actually been pushing the wall back and back and back. So for me, I feel like oftentimes it just takes a moment of reflection and be like, okay, look, we have this challenge. We don't necessarily have the tool or the framework or the regulation or the stakeholder that's genuinely on our side right now, but those little wins that you've been mentioning, like they do add up over time.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more. I think these small gains are what we need, what I aspire for at least. And I hope that, more communities, more defenders will be motivated when they hear these stories. And then, we basically upscale, or we multiply in terms of quantity, and in terms of our struggles.
All right, so on that, I'm going to ask you the last question, which is, obviously you need more people to come into this. You need more young professionals to come into your space. If they were, you're talking to like a 22-year-old fresh out of college, what are some tips or tools or mindsets for them to get into the space? What guidance would you give to help them about building impact, longevity in the work? Like, what are two or three things you'd give them that, like, look, this is the career you're going to be in. This is what I've been on. This is why it's meaningful. Here's two or three things that you can do to make it more impactful or, have more joy out of the work.
Let's say I'll just say two things that I would tell, more young people who are aspiring in the development field or human rights field, is that firstly, it's patience. It's not like it's not like a bank job that you do intern to 3 months, and then you start as a cashier, you start earning immediately, no. Then the second thing that I would say is we are often working with communities whom I feel like whom I feel that I always learn from. So they should always be willing to learn. Just because you are able to use computer, and you are working with a traditional elder who doesn't know, it doesn't even know a smartphone. Yeah, doesn't mean you can teach him everything about communication or modern technologies. He can teach you a lot about storytelling and how to you know effectively drive an idea through to the other side, right? That is actually one challenge that I have faced with some of the young persons that I've worked with, no, that they feel like, okay, we have learned the laws, we've learned we've learned the system. I know how to file a complaint. They should be listening to me, and I think that's not the way. Like, I think it should be a two-way process, two-way communication, because the other person, at least the elders, the women, even, no, even the youth, who have lived in these communities, can tell you so much about their traditional knowledge, about their local customs, local realities, that you can learn from. And I think that should be one of the motivations for you to for young persons to work with these communities, not just help them, but also be learning from them.